So we're back on track. So where was I? Oh yeah, so I was gonna say this is a very broad topic that covers many things from lean startup methods, software, hardware, pitching VC. So obviously there's not gonna be enough time for me to cover everything you need to know, but with the 15 minutes given left, I hope to give you enough of an idea, a general idea to know where to look on your own after this. Okay, so what is a socially impactful company? You've probably heard of social enterprises. A social enterprise is a company whose main purpose is to promote, encourage, and make social change. Traditionally, being a social enterprise means the majority of your earning is reinvested into your mission so that you don't need to rely on donations to sustain yourself over the long term. But that kind of sounds like charity with extra steps. It sounds like a company is struggling to keep the lights on while trying to do charity work. Now saying this is not a valid way to make the world a better place, and this is completely admirable, but probably not why you're here today. There are many companies that are creating fascinating products that people love, making a ton of money, driving innovations that make our day-to-day life so much more efficient, so much more sustainable, yet nobody would ever think of them as social enterprises. For example, Tesla's mission is to accelerate the world's transition to sustainable energy. They've been the driving force, pun intended, for the world to switch to electric vehicles. And they are also a crucial promoter of renewable energy through other products like Solar Roof and Powerwall. And they are a $700 billion company. Does this sound like they're struggling to keep the lights on? So the truth is, you don't have to limit yourself to being a charity to make the world a better place. You can create a commercially successful company that is equally socially impactful. The question is, what aspect of society do you want to help change? Everybody's interested in some sort of social topics. Dig deeper into yours, like climate change, social injustice, the Great Pacific Garbage Patch that is 3 times the size of France, that is floating on the Pacific Ocean and suffocating millions of fish at a time. So it doesn't have to be a world scale issue either. As long as it does some good to a specific group of people, you're already making your startup meaningful. Sam Altman, who used to be president of YC, said, make something some people love, not something many people like. Go build something people can get crazy about, make them voluntarily and sometimes even unknowingly join your effort to help the world. There are many startups that focus on what's hot, what's easier to raise money from VC than raise and grow and sell. It is true that it is easier to raise money in an industry a lot of capital is looking at, and you as a startup definitely need capital to speed up your growth. But is it hard to raise money for a startup with a big dream? Is it harder for a startup that wants to clean up the garbage floating on the ocean to raise money than, say, a crypto startup? Not really. This is a great time, actually, better than ever for startups that want to help the world to raise funds. This is unimaginable, even just say 5 years ago. 5 years ago, say at a venture capital fund, when someone brings up, hey, maybe we should look into startups that work on environmental issues, their coworkers, other investors will be like, come on, are we really gonna go through this again? But nowadays, there's a thing that now almost every VC has, which is called an ESG mandate, environmental, social, and governance. Most VCs now have this as part of the mission. Some even have plans that at least, oh, excuse me, at least how much of their capital needs to be invested in ESG related startups every year. So this is great news for startups, but also kind of sad too, because the world really is at a point where there's a real push from different governments and even the capital market to make sure humans can keep on surviving before it's too late. But even though you have a noble cause, VCs will still view you as a business. After all, you come up with some product, some service that people will scream, shut up and take my money, and help save the world at the same time. So while you are working on thinking about what you want to do, keep this in mind: eyes on the stars, feet on the ground. This thing you want to fix in the world, you're most likely not going to come up with the best solution on your first try. In fact, the startup you're founding or joining 90% of the time is going to be only remotely close to what you're trying to fix. But don't worry, that's completely fine. As long as you're working towards that end goal, you're doing great. Just be prepared. This might take some time. Like, for example, me and my founders started Mary in 2017 to solve world hunger, but we started by helping people grow better weed. But that's completely fine because cannabis is actually one of the most difficult crops to grow well, and it's a very sensitive plant. So the automation, the algorithms, the hardware design principles, they're a lot more complex than your typical veggies. So this whole experience gave us a very unique edge and made our technology one of the most efficient in the world. And now in 2021, we're getting closer and closer to help everybody in the world, not just some potheads. But do what's legal, okay? If you're still under 19, forget what I just said. So let's assume you have a vision, an idea. How do you turn it into a good cause that is also profitable? How do you get from A to B effectively? I don't know if you guys buy groceries a lot, but last year when around March, when COVID just hit, it was also around the time where CN Rail was on strike, the borders were closed, there was limited truck traffic, and it was early spring, so farmers just started to sow the seeds in the land. It was very far away from harvest. So prices for all kinds of produce visibly went up every day. Why? Because Canada relies too much on produce imported from the US, from the South. Not to Canada's fault, but we do have a climate that kind of sucks that only give us like 4 months a year to grow food. So let's say you want to give Canada food self-sufficiency by creating indoor vertical farms that can literally pump out fresh vegetables 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. These vertical farms can completely disregard local climate and season as long as there's electricity and water. Sounds great, right? Typically, it costs from $150 to $300 per square foot for a vertical farm. So you need around $300,000 to set up a decent farm to start operating and R&D, and you don't have any numbers to show to VC to raise any funds, revenue, or customers. So it's impossible to raise. Back in 2017, vertical farming wasn't an industry that many VCs liked to invest in. So the options in front of us, in front of Mary, was either keep trying to raise that $300,000 until there isn't $300,000 in Mary's bank account, and there isn't any savings left in our own bank account to keep on trying, or do something that is similar to growing vegetables, but more eye-catching, something that would have a more immediate outcome, something legal cannabis. So in 2017, medical cannabis had been legal for some years, and recreational cannabis was about to get legalized. On average, a medical cannabis patient needed to consume about 2.2 grams of cannabis a day, and that's over $600 a month. Most of the patients are not in a position to be able to afford it, and insurance wasn't covering spending on medical cannabis. So naturally, they wonder if they could grow it because it's plant, but it turns out cannabis is pretty hard to grow. And there's so much information online, they wouldn't even know where to start. And the equipment you could find online looked like this, pretty sketchy. So we created an all-in-one grow box. User don't need to know anything about growing, just put in a seed or seedling, tell it what strain it was, and the unit will pull the specific growing recipe algorithms from our cloud and start growing automatically. It was so easy and cheap that compared to what cost $10 a gram, it became around 60 cents. And the unit also looked like it was from Tron or Daft Punk's helmet. So it looked like nothing that ever came to market. People in the industry said it was like Apple and Tesla got together and made a weed growing machine. It was an instant hit. I'm actually sitting in front of a couple of prototypes, but since I don't have my cameras on, but they look very sketchy and they cost very, very little, only like a couple $100. But as we iterated, it looked more and more like this. And we took off from there. So the moral of the story is be practical, from solving world hunger to growing cannabis. There's a balance between your vision and what immediately gets you going. And this is so important that it could be a matter of life and death for your company. You can't change the world if you're dead, metaphorically speaking. And in the reading material section, I listed an essay by Paul Graham on how not to die. I think it's a fascinating piece that if you have time, you should definitely take a look. Crossing the Chasm is also great on getting a product from early adopters to mass market, which is a necessary step if you want to take your product to reach as many people as possible. Another thing about being popular is when you're creating something, always keep being appealing in mind. Your design doesn't need to be fancy, but it does need to stand out. There's no best in art, only different. And being different attracts people. It gets you noticed. A great piece of invention that no one uses is kind of a worthless piece of invention. And while being different, it needs to be different in a good way. Never put form before function, meaning every design decision you make needs to serve to make the whole user experience better. Now, let's assume you have a cool product that is the first step of your master plan and is ready to go to market. The rest is going to be pretty similar to a regular startup. The only difference is don't ever forget why you started this. Okay, I think we don't have much time left, but before I open the floor for questions, let me show you some industries you could potentially work in that can help make the world a better place while having pretty good potential to become massive markets. There's also a link somewhere in your email or workshop intro. Y Combinator has a page full of requests for startups. That's a pretty good place to find ideas. But here, just to name a few, for example, carbon emission is a very big problem for planet Earth. There's two ways to solve this problem. First is generating less carbon emission or capture more. There's different ways to do it. We probably consume a lot of meat. If you consume a lot of meat like I do, maybe you can start to think about how to eat cleaner meat. For example, regenerative grazing is used in animal husbandry industry that captures carbon instead of emitting carbon when cows or sheep graze. But it's pretty costly right now to do it. There's cultured meat. One of the biggest sources of carbon emission or greenhouse gases is from cows' gases, but cultured meat is actually lab-grown meat. It's not plant-based, it's real meat, but it doesn't produce as much gas, nearly as much gas as cows do. And also there's a thing called Soylent. I don't know if you guys are probably too young to know it, but there was a thing a couple years ago. It's a drink with every kind of nutrients, minerals, vitamins, fiber, protein in it. 4 or 5 bottles a day, you have enough everything for your body, so you don't need to eat anything anymore. The concept is pretty cool, but tastes and you'll have a craving for eating normal food, so you end up eating twice the calories you burn every day. So that's a pretty good place to start. And also cleaner energy. I think this is pretty straightforward. For example, LED lighting. LED is already way more efficient than the traditional lighting we've been using, but it's still around 35 to 40% of conversion rate. That means 40%, 60% of the electricity that is used in an LED light turns into waste heat. So there's 60% of room for you to improve on. And last one, I have 20 more seconds. Since I'm working in agriculture, so I think I will spend just a minute to talk about food security. In 2050, there will be another 25% more, around 9.9 billion people living on this planet, and the demand for foods will increase by another 70%. That means we will need to produce more food in the next 30 years than humanity has ever produced in the last 10,000 years combined. And extreme weather events have become more intense and more frequent, making harvests less consistent and harder to secure. And every year, 110 billion US dollars is lost from unsafe food in developing countries. And contaminated food causes 550 million people to get sick and 230,000 deaths every year. If this is an issue that ever crossed your mind before, I hope you would consider using your creativity and skills and join the next phase of agriculture. Thank you.
All right. I just wanted to say thank you so much for this presentation, Frank. I found it super interesting, and I wish we had the entire time for you to do your presentation. But that was amazing. Thank you.
No worries. If you have any questions, I'm on LinkedIn. What shouldn't be too hard to find me with my name. Yeah.
Okay. Well, if no one has any questions, thank you everyone for coming to this workshop. Thanks again, Frank, for presenting, and I hope everyone has a great evening.
Thank you for having me. Have a good night.